Is Angela Latimer, and I am a Senior Support Escalation Engineer for the Global Business Support Unit within Management and Security Division. And we're going to do a couple of these brown bags related to Forefront Endpoint Protection 2010 or FEP 2010 based on some of the cases that we've seen come in recently. For today's brown bag, we will be covering the alerting process and troubleshooting. Okay, and as far as the agenda, we will cover FEP Alerts as well as the process flow of the alerts and troubleshooting techniques for those. So we'll cover FEP Alerts first. So the whole reason people want to do alerting is basically to notify them of important malware events that take place in their environment. Typically, these would be via email, but could also potentially be through other means or methods. The one thing in particular with regards to how FEP 2010 works, it's not a real-time solution. It is there is some timing delays that are factored into this that we'll talk about a little bit in more detail with the process flow. But basically, there is a FEP monitoring service which polls the FEP reporting database, which is the FEP DW, every 2 minutes to determine if there are actionable events that need to be alerted upon. We'll also talk about the fact that the alerts are tunable. Basically, there are different types of alerts that can be configured based upon thresholds and who should be receiving the alerts. Again, these are stateless events. This is not like System Center Operations Manager where things are more real-time. Basically, the alert occurs and you move forward from there. There is no way to basically dismiss the alert at that point like you would in Operations Manager. And then the final thing is that you can view these alerts through the FEP reports as well as the dashboard. So what's needed to configure an alerts notification? Basically, you would need an SMTP server, which could be set up to authenticate via anonymous or Windows integrated. And then you also want to make sure that you're diligent in who is receiving those alerts via email. You want to make sure that if you're using a distribution list, that's kept up to date. You don't want people that don't need to be in that particular loop to receive the emails if it's not necessary. So what are the settings that we would have to configure within FEP 2010 to allow this to work? Basically, of course, you would need your SMTP server and the port, and then also select your authentication method, whether you're using anonymous or Windows integrated. And then you specify an email address that you want to show as the originator address. Once that's been configured, you can select the test and close. And that will then prompt you for an email recipient, which could be a distribution list or an individual. And basically, you would then get this dialog box which tells you that the email should be sent within 5 minutes or so, and then if it's not, you can actually troubleshoot via your event log to try to figure out what's going on with your mail server. The big thing to note here is that if this part does not work with the test email, then all other alert emails will also fail as well. And this is just a sample of the test alert email, what it would look like. Basically, you would see who it came from, which is the FEP server at me.com. See that it's a test alert, and then who it was sent to. So what are the alert types? Basically, there are 4 different configurable alert types, 3 of which are multi-instance alert types, and then 1 single instance alert type. So what does it mean to have a multi-instance alert type? Basically, that means you can set up as many of these as you want based on the collection that you want to target. You can also have different thresholds, and you can also have different recipient lists or emails set up as a result of that. With the single instance type, you're not able to configure multiple instances of this particular alert, which in this case is a malware outbreak alert. So at this point, we'll walk through each of the different alert options that we have. The first being the malware detection alert. Basically, anytime there is malware that's detected on a computer, you can have an alert set up so that it will trigger and send out an email to the desired listing. The first thing you would have to do is select the collection that you want to monitor. From there, you would want to set your threshold, whether you want it to be high, medium, or low. And the meaning of those, the high is that malware was detected. Whether it was cleaned or not, that's irrelevant. It would still trigger. With the medium threshold, that means action is still required. The malware was detected and action is still required to actually remove that malware, such as a reboot or a full scan. And then the low threshold is that malware is still active on the system. It was detected, but it's still active on the system, so that may raise some concerns that those particular systems would need to be further addressed. So what type of response would you typically think of as part of this particular type of alert? You can drill down into the different reports, starting at the top level with the computer list report of any of the computers that fall into this category. Once you drill down into or open the computer list report, you can then drill down into the computer details as well as the malware details that is actually found on that system, and then research the actual malware itself. And again, this is just another example of how this is different from a single instance. You can actually configure this to monitor a different collection with a different threshold and even change the recipient list. And this is just walking back through basically a flow chart of what would take place. Basically, Forefront would send an alert when the malware is detected on the system based on the collection that you've set to monitor, and then, of course, based on the threshold that you select. And then an email is sent to the recipients that are listed. So the next type of multi-instance alert is a repeated malware detection, meaning that it's the same malware, it was cleaned and then it came back. Usually you would see this if there's maybe a malware dropper that wasn't detected by FEP and it continues to come back. So in this situation, you would want to make sure that if a system is continually being reinfected with the same malware, that you dig a little bit deeper to figure out what else is on the system or what potential attack vectors are possibly open on the system that's allowing the reinfection to occur. The thresholds with this type of alert are the number of detections and within a given time interval. And again, the response again would be leveraging your reports, your computer list report, your computer details, malware details, and then also researching the actual malware. And the flow chart of this is very similar. Specify the collection, the number of repeated malware detections. That can be 4, 8, 16, or 32. And then the malware detection interval for for 4 hours. Did you see the reinfection occur 24 hours or within a week. And then the email is sent to the recipient list. And then the last of the multi-instance alert types is multiple malware detections. And in this situation, it's different malware that's being detected on a particular system using the same thresholds based on the number of detections and the time interval, with the same type of response, leveraging the reports that we have built into FEP. And the flow chart for this, again, very similar to the previous one with the repeated malware. You monitor the collection, the number of malware detections, the interval, and then the email is sent to the recipients. So with the single instance alert type, which is the malware outbreak alert, this one is slightly different, and it's looking at all of the systems in the environment. And it's looking to, the threshold basically is based on the number of clients that are infected to determine if there is a malware outbreak in a particular situation. And with this one, with this one, the response would more or less, you would look into the malware details of the report to figure out what the malware is, and then identify your mitigation steps to try to prevent the malware from continuing to spread within the environment. So this is one that I would say would be recommended based on the total number of systems in the environment. You would potentially want to specify a percentage of those systems to figure out if there is a possible malware outbreak occurring in your environment. And the flow chart for this one is pretty straightforward. You basically would just specify the number of systems that would have to show up with the same or with malware to cause the alert to trigger. And this, I wanted to show some of the samples of the email alerts what the alerts would actually look like. So for the malware detection, which is the multi-instance one, it would basically show you the computer system that is infected, the domain, the fully qualified domain name, the collection that was being monitored, the actual malware name, the process that was associated with it, the action that was taken, and if that action was successful or not. For the repeated malware, it would be very similar. You would see the malware name, the computer that was infected, the monitoring collection, or the monitored collection, the number of detections, and then what that detection interval was. And then the last sample email that I captured was the actual outbreak. Since I only had one system in my lab, I made that the threshold basically for the number of computers affected, which would be 1 in this particular example, and then give you the malware and then the detection interval. And of course, you would want to leverage your reports. Looks like I have a typo there. It should say malware activity report. And also leverage your dashboard. So I think most everyone on the call is familiar with the FEP dashboard and what everything looks like. The section that we are in this particular case concerned with is the malware activity status section, where there are different types of events or statuses that we would want to be aware of, and those being infected, restart required, full scan required, or recent activity. And those statuses actually have matching collections that go along with it as well. So when you drill down or select those hyperlinks, it actually shows you the the resulting collection that's associated with that hyperlink. So these are the matching FEP collections that tie in with those different statuses. So what happens when you do drill down? You select that hyperlink. It then allows you to see the system from that collection view, and for this one it would be the recent activity collection, the systems that are associated with that, and then from there you can actually run a computer details report to get more information about that particular system and what type of malware is found on that system. And here is where we can actually run reports that are associated with any type of malware activity. You also see the computer list report. And then as far as mitigations, we kind of mentioned that earlier. You can right-click, excuse me, you can right-click on a particular system or group of systems and select FEP operations, and that will give you different mitigation steps. You can actually run a full scan or a quick scan, or you can choose to have the definitions updated. When you do this, it's not a real-time activity. Again, you're leveraging the back end of Config Manager. So what happens in the background is a new collection gets created with that system or group of systems that you have selected, and then an advertisement is actually sent to that new collection with the selected activity or mitigation step, whether that's running anti-malware definition updates, running a quick scan, or running a full scan. By default, Config Manager clients usually check in every 60 minutes, so again, that just lets you know that it's not a real-time activity. It's an activity that may take a little bit of time unless you're using another utility to help speed up that process. So the next section is kind of the meat and potatoes of how the FEP alerting works, which will cover the actual process flow and troubleshooting. All right, so what initially happens if there is malware that's detected on a system? FEP will detect it, and the anti-malware engine will, of course, try to block or remove that malware. Usually within a few minutes, not necessarily a full 10 minutes, but within a few minutes, it will then update the event log of the malware that was found on the system and the remediation steps that were taken by FEP. From there, the FEP client will actually update WMI with a report that DCM, or Desired Configuration Manager, the DCM agent, which is part of the Config Manager client, will then leverage or basically run its baseline to pull a report from WMI regarding the malware that was detected and hopefully successfully removed from the system. That DCM report is then sent up to the Config Manager site via the management point, and the state messages that are associated with the Config Manager DCM client, basically those are reported every 15 minutes. So you can see that we're kind of building a timeline of approximately how long it will take for events to traverse from the client all the way up to the server side. So at this point, we're right around 25 minutes. Once the DCM state messages have made it to the Config Manager site and have been processed into the Config Manager database, that information is then reflected by the FEP dashboard. And to ensure that the FEP dashboard is up to date, you can actually, there's a section where you can select run operational statistics, or if you have it set to update, I believe the minimum is hourly, to see the latest information pulled from the Config Manager site database. So after that information has been processed into the Config Manager database, every 15 minutes there is a SQL job that runs called Get New Data that pulls data from the Config Manager database into the FEP database as well as the FEP data warehouse. Once that information has been processed into the FEP data warehouse, there is another service called the Forefront Endpoint Protection Monitoring Service, which runs every 2 minutes to determine if there are any alerting actions that need to be taken based upon the fact if you have alerts configured. If you don't have alerts configured, then this does not happen. But if the alerting has been set up, then this will occur every 2 minutes to check against the FEP data warehouse. On the other side of that, you'll notice there's an OLAP cube which actually ties in with the FEP data warehouse. The OLAP as well as the FEP data warehouse, they tie into what's called SQL Server Reporting Services, or SSRS, for the capability of running reports. But for our focus, we're looking specifically at what's highlighted there in red with the FEP data warehouse, the FEP monitoring service, and then the trigger of the FEP alerts. Our next brown bag will actually cover SSRS and the FEP reports. So when it comes to troubleshooting, when you take a look at the client side, you typically would want to start with the system event viewer. That will let you know if there was malware detected, and then you're looking for the specific event ID 1116, and then the corresponding event ID 1117 is if there was an action taken and was that action actually successful. The other part of that, we mentioned the desired configuration management baselines. There are basically 4 baselines that get installed as part of Forefront Endpoint Protection in a managed situation. The anti-malware status, the definitions and health, malware activity, and malware detections. The 2 that we are usually most concerned with are malware activity and malware detections. And those are the ones that get triggered when there is malware that's detected on the system, and which allows the DCM agent, again, which is part of Config Manager, the Config Manager client, to package those up into a report to be sent to the Config Manager site server every 15 minutes. The other things that you can actually leverage as part of your troubleshooting, if you're comfortable using WMI or maneuvering around in WMI, you can use WebMTest. By connecting to the root Microsoft Security Client namespace, you can drill down into those different namespaces and classes to figure out, is that information actually being logged into WMI? Because if it's not, then when the DCM baselines run, it's not going to be able to pull that information out. So that's kind of an important step that does happen after malware is detected on the system, and FEP will then update its own WMI namespace with that information that is then pulled out by DCM. When it comes to the logs that you can leverage, you can actually take a look at the DCM agent, which actually shows the evaluation of the baselines, the state message log, which shows the processing of the state messages that are sent to the management point, and then the actual configuration or the CCM exec log, which is the actual config manager client. That basically shows all communications between the config manager client and the config manager management point. If the communications between the client and the management point are broken, then there will be no flow of information between the two. So if that's broken, then of course we would want to make sure that we engage the config manager team to help us in that situation. So what about the server side? Just as there are logs on the client side, there are also logs on the management point, as well as the actual site server side. The first log that you would want to take a look at is the mp_relay.log, which is the management point relay. That ties in with the management point, and it processes those state messages that are sent up by the client. The state sys message, which is part of the config manager site server itself, is what does the actual processing of those state messages into the SQL database or the config manager site database. One other thing that I did mention was the get new data job that runs every 15 minutes. If you're familiar with SQL, you can dig into the SQL Server agent and take a look at the SQL job history. Again, the get new data job is what pulls information out of the config manager site database and places that information into not only the FEP database, but also the FEP data warehouse, which is what's used to help trigger the alerts. So if those jobs don't complete, or excuse me, I should say, if that job does not complete, which includes seven different steps, if that fails, then the alerting will also not function properly. Another thing that you'll want to check is the Forefront Endpoint Protection Monitoring Service. You do want to make sure that that service is running. And then last but not least is the actual FEP serve service itself. You can actually see different events related to that particular source within the application and services log event viewer. And just for some additional information, those are a few of the references. There are event IDs that are tied to the FEP server side as well as the FEP client, and then at the bottom that also gives some more information about the FEP alert timing, which we kind of talked about as well. I did want to do a quick demo, show a few things. And for the purposes of this demo, I'm doing everything on the config manager site server, including the client pieces. Had a little bit of a hiccup on one of my clients, so I want to make sure that we see everything that's supposed to be there. So this is of course, this is the FEP dashboard and how we can drill down into the different collections and run our reports. I've already run this report so that it didn't take so long to actually show up, but here are some of the details of the system that was found to have been infected. It gives you the protection status. It tells you what engine version, basically a high-level overview of the client itself, but then it digs down a little bit deeper into the actual malware activity. What was detected, when was it detected. It gives you the current events as well as if there have been any prior events that may have occurred throughout the month. And with these hyperlinks, this is how you can actually drill down into getting more details about the malware itself. And this gives you an external link to our MMPC, which gives more details about the actual malware. And again, more information about monthly statistics that you can also review. And here are the actual alerts. You've got your malware detection alert, and I've got my all systems collection selected, and I've got the high threshold, and I'm having emails sent to myself. The outbreak repeated, and then the multiple malware detections. I did run ICAR on this system so that we could actually dig into WebM. Actually, I'll do this from the beginning. And to drill down into the different classes, you would typically select enum classes recursive. And then you'll see the classes that we covered. In particular, I'm going to drill down into the malware one and then select instances. And I had 2 different instances of the ICAR malware that I ran on this system. And then show MOF. And this is basically the same information that you would see in the event viewer. But this is what the DCM, or the desired configuration manager agent, that's what it's pulling. It's pulling this information when those baselines actually run. So if there's no information here, then those DCM baselines will not be able to pull back that information. Let's see, I'll jump into the event viewer. And here were my instances of the malware where it was detected, and then the 1117 where it was actually removed. Let's see, I'll go into SQL and show you the get new data. And what's important here is you want to view the history. And these are the 7 steps that are associated with that SQL job. And if there's a failure at any of these steps, then of course the whole job will fail. And then of course your alerts won't work. So you do want to check this and make sure that the SQL job is completing as expected. And there are 2. There's the get new data on install. That one is what's initially run when you install the FEP reporting component. And it's only run that one time. After that, then the get new data is run every 15 minutes after that. And the last thing that I wanted to show you was the FEP serve, and actually that is found, as I mentioned before, in the applications and services log. And you'll see that I do have some errors, which is kind of a good thing, so you can see what it looks like when it's not functioning correctly. But this was the alert during that 2-minute interval of it checking against the FEP data warehouse, where it sees that there is an alert that I do have triggered, or that I do have configured. So it triggers the email alert, and this is the information that it would include in that email. Another malware detection, and then the malware outbreak, since I have that one system. But you'll see here that I got an error trying to create the email or send the email. So there was a failure was actually sending the email. Typically, you would see a success, but there's something that's probably broken with my mail service that's causing this particular error. But it's kind of good to see, you know, a failure so that you kind of know what to expect. And then this, of course, gives a little bit more information about the alert manager failing. And I believe that is all that I have in terms of alerts. Let me go ahead and take everyone off mute. Okay, everyone is off mute. If you have questions, just trying to see if there is anything in the chat window. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer, or did this provide sufficient information?
It's definitely a good training.
Thank you. I know what we see sometimes with a lot of the customers, usually the issue is with that get new data, but it's also good to know that if that is functioning correctly, what are the other components that allow the alerting to work, or even the reporting, because that get new data job is also important to the reporting aspect of FEP as well. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.